Welcome to True Crime Threads, where dark secrets unravel. Today's case explores a deadly betrayal between best friends. In a quiet suburban neighborhood, two women, Jennifer and Janet, had been best friends for over a decade. Their friendship seemed unbreakable, and they shared everything from laughter-filled coffee dates to weekend family gatherings, with Jennifer's children often in tow. Jennifer was a devoted mother of two and a loving wife, while Janet was single and childless, though she loved being around Jennifer's children as if they were her own. Together, they were the kind of best friends others admired, embodying a bond that felt more like sisterhood. People in the community would often say they were inseparable. No one could imagine one without the other. But beneath the surface, Janet harbored feelings that Jennifer couldn't have imagined. She watched as Jennifer's life flourished with everything Janet had always yearned for: a stable, affectionate husband, two joyful children, and a close-knit family that enveloped Jennifer in warmth and security. Though she often seemed supportive and encouraging, Janet's friendship had a darker edge, tainted by a jealousy she concealed with a smiling face and kind words. This jealousy was a slow burn, simmering quietly as she involved herself more and more in Jennifer's life. Her feelings, however, weren't just passive envy. They became an obsession, one that grew every time she saw Jennifer's family enjoying moments Janet felt she deserved. To outsiders, Janet was merely a dedicated friend, often going out of her way to help Jennifer with household tasks or babysitting the children. But Jennifer's trust made it easy for Janet to insert herself further into her life, feeding her need to be close while masking her resentment. Janet's increasing involvement seemed like pure kindness, a friend helping a friend. Jennifer appreciated the help and had no reason to question Janet's motives, seeing her as someone she could always rely on. The children adored Janet, and Jennifer was grateful for her consistent support. The bond seemed unshakable. Yet Janet's friendly gestures masked a growing darkness. Her envy twisted into resentment each time she saw Jennifer's family together. Though she rarely spoke of her own disappointments, the feeling that life had unfairly favored Jennifer grew, haunting her thoughts. To Janet, Jennifer had the life she believed she deserved, and the longer she stayed around Jennifer's family, the more intensely her jealousy brewed. What had begun as admiration for Jennifer's life had transformed into a possessive longing. Janet was determined to have a life like Jennifer's, and with each passing day, her envy turned into a force that would eventually lead her down a path of devastation. Jennifer had no reason to question her friend's intentions as Janet became more deeply intertwined in her daily life. Janet was eager to help at every turn, often appearing at Jennifer's door unannounced with offers to lend a hand. She'd show up to clean the house, cook meals, or take the children out for an afternoon, giving Jennifer time to relax or focus on other responsibilities. Jennifer found it comforting to have someone so dependable by her side, someone who seemed genuinely invested in her well-being and her family's happiness. She trusted Janet wholeheartedly, assuming her friend's devotion was an extension of the bond they had shared for years. Jennifer's husband, Elijah, however, had begun to feel uneasy about Janet's constant presence. While he trusted Jennifer's instincts, he couldn't ignore the subtle ways Janet seemed to be filling a space that felt almost too close, too intimate. Janet was involved in nearly every aspect of their lives, often stepping in where most friends wouldn't. She didn't just offer help, she anticipated Jennifer's needs before she even asked. It was as if she was always one step ahead, making herself indispensable to Jennifer and her family. Elijah brushed off his concerns, chalking them up to overthinking, and allowed Jennifer's friendship with Janet to carry on undisturbed. Meanwhile, Janet's influence continued to grow stronger, becoming more pervasive with each passing week. She began quietly isolating Jennifer from other friends, making subtle comments that suggested they weren't as loyal or supportive as she was. She'd mention how others seemed to take Jennifer for granted or that they didn't care as deeply about her family's well-being. Jennifer, unaware of Janet's true intentions, began to rely more heavily on her friend, seeing her as a stable force when other friendships grew more distant. Janet's influence was quiet but insidious, gradually weaving a web around Jennifer's life that allowed little room for anyone else. As she embedded herself more deeply, Janet took note of Jennifer's frustrations, particularly those involving Elijah. She knew that even the happiest marriages had their rough spots, and she used those moments to her advantage, subtly planting seeds of doubt about Elijah's faithfulness. Janet's remarks were careful and calculated, often disguised as concern. She'd say things like, "I just want to make sure he's treating you right," or "Are you sure he's as dedicated as you are?" Jennifer would dismiss the comments, but the thoughts lingered, making her question things she hadn't considered before. To Janet, each moment of doubt and every expression of frustration was a small victory. She knew that Jennifer was beginning to feel isolated, vulnerable, and perhaps even a little dependent on her support. This was exactly what she had wanted to weaken Jennifer's trust in others, especially Elijah, and to create a dynamic in which Jennifer felt like she could rely on no one but her. Janet's plan was falling into place, and as she deepened her control over Jennifer's life, her dark intentions grew clearer. She would stop at nothing to possess what Jennifer had, and her envy had transformed into something far more dangerous than anyone could imagine. One evening, Jennifer and her 2 children disappeared without a trace, sending shockwaves through the quiet neighborhood. Elijah was the first to notice that something was terribly wrong. When he came home to an empty house and saw that Jennifer hadn't left any messages, he immediately felt a rush of panic. He called friends and family, hoping she had just gone out on a whim, but no one had seen her or the children. As the hours passed, the sinking realization that they were truly missing set in. Desperate and distraught, Elijah reported their disappearance to the authorities, igniting a community-wide search. Word of Jennifer's disappearance spread quickly, and the neighborhood mobilized, with friends, family, and neighbors rallying together to search for the missing mother and her children. Janet was one of the first to arrive at Elijah's side, seemingly devastated and offering her full support. She comforted him, expressing shock and disbelief that Jennifer, her best friend, could simply vanish. Janet quickly took the lead in organizing search efforts, going door to door, posting flyers, and rallying the community to scour nearby parks, wooded areas, and abandoned properties. Her dedication was unwavering, and she took on the role of a heartbroken friend who wanted nothing more than to find Jennifer and bring her home safely. Behind the scenes, however, Janet's concern was anything but genuine. She had meticulously planned Jennifer's disappearance, covering her tracks and building a carefully crafted alibi that would keep her free of suspicion. Janet had made sure no one would trace anything back to her. Her outward display of grief and relentless drive to find her friend only served as a cover, ensuring she appeared as far removed from suspicion as possible. As days turned into weeks with no sign of Jennifer or her children, Elijah began to unravel, his distress mounting with each unanswered question. The police investigated tirelessly, but with limited leads, they struggled to make progress. People began to wonder if Jennifer had chosen to leave voluntarily, though those who knew her dismissed the idea Jennifer was devoted to her family and would never abandon her children. Yet, with no concrete evidence pointing to foul play, authorities were at a loss. Janet played her part perfectly, weaving herself deeper into the lives of those around her, especially Elijah's. Her behavior became subtly unsettling to some, especially neighbors who began to notice how she'd slipped into Jennifer's life with alarming ease. Though she was outwardly compassionate, a few found it strange how quickly Janet seemed to be taking over, showing up daily at Elijah's door with meals, offering to care for the children's rooms, and filling Jennifer's absence as though it were her own role to assume. Her actions, though helpful on the surface, carried an unsettling undertone, but no one could prove anything. There was no concrete reason to suspect her. Still, Janet's fixation was beginning to crack her once calm exterior. Though the police questioned her as a routine measure, her well-crafted alibi and seemingly genuine distress diverted their attention elsewhere. Janet remained confident, believing she had covered every detail. But under the surface, her obsession with Jennifer's life had grown even more consuming, and she found herself slipping deeper into a role she had secretly longed to play for years. Janet had believed that this was finally her chance to assume Jennifer's life as her own, and the disappearance of her best friend was only the first step in her disturbing plan. Little did she know, however, that the truth would soon come back to haunt her. Several weeks later, a chilling breakthrough came when a hiker stumbled upon a disturbing scene in a densely wooded area several miles from town. Among scattered leaves and branches, the hiker noticed what appeared to be children's belongings partially buried in the dirt. Nearby, he found torn pieces of clothing that looked oddly familiar from the news reports about Jennifer and her children. The hiker immediately contacted authorities, and within hours, a team of investigators descended on the location, sectioning off the area and beginning a thorough search. What they found would shock not only the community but everyone who had believed in Janet's outward display of grief and innocence. Further investigation of the site led them to a heartbreaking discovery: the bodies of Jennifer and her 2 young children, carefully hidden in a shallow grave beneath layers of soil and debris. The scene was haunting, a stark contrast to the vibrant life Jennifer had once led. The community was devastated by the revelation that they hadn't simply lost a mother and her children to a tragic accident or circumstance. They were now confronted with the harsh reality of a brutal crime. The discovery transformed the case into a full-blown homicide investigation, and the police now had tangible evidence to work with. A detailed forensic analysis of the scene uncovered subtle but crucial pieces of evidence that pointed toward someone Jennifer had trusted deeply. Authorities began revisiting key details and re-interviewing people close to Jennifer, especially focusing on the last few people who had seen her. In the light of new evidence, Janet, once thought to be a grieving friend, fell back under scrutiny. Despite her initial cooperation, small cracks in her alibi and her overly eager involvement in the investigation began to raise red flags for detectives. As the investigation intensified, investigators noticed that Janet's behavior had changed subtly in the days following the discovery. The calm, composed exterior she had maintained was beginning to crumble under the weight of her own lies. Friends and neighbors who had once believed her sincere grief began to feel unsettled by her reactions, noting a strange shift from sorrow to an eerie detachment. Her once convincing role as Jennifer's grieving friend was unraveling, and the community began to sense something far darker beneath her facade. Investigators turned their attention to forensic evidence from the scene, and it wasn't long before they found physical traces that linked Janet to the wooded area. Small fibers from Janet's clothing, hairs that matched her DNA, and faint footprints all connected her to the place where Jennifer and her children had been hidden. Each piece of evidence was like a pinhole in her carefully crafted alibi, allowing detectives to see the truth behind the mask Janet had worn so convincingly. As the pressure mounted, Janet's composure further deteriorated. She had underestimated the intensity of the investigation and the skill of forensic experts who pieced together every fragment she had left behind. It became increasingly apparent to the police and the community alike that Janet's involvement was more than mere bad luck or coincidence. Her carefully woven web of lies was unraveling at an alarming pace, revealing the true depths of her envy, manipulation, and deadly intentions. In a final attempt to protect herself, Janet tried to shift suspicion, but her story no longer held weight under the scrutiny of evidence. The horrifying truth emerged in sharp relief: she had orchestrated the entire tragedy, driven by an insatiable desire to possess Jennifer's life. Janet's obsession had turned lethal, and the community was left grappling with the knowledge that someone so close, so trusted, had harbored such darkness. In the end, there was no escaping the consequences of her actions, and Janet's carefully constructed world collapsed under the truth she had tried so desperately to bury. As the investigation closed in on Janet, the final pieces of her carefully woven story began to unravel, exposing the horrific truth of what she had done. Under mounting pressure and an overwhelming array of evidence, Janet was arrested, sending shockwaves through the community that had once seen her as nothing more than a devoted friend. During the trial, the full extent of her obsession and her twisted motives came to light, revealing a dark, disturbing fixation that had taken root years earlier and had only grown stronger as she integrated herself further into Jennifer's life. The courtroom was packed each day of Janet's trial, with neighbors, former friends, and family members all gathering to witness the unfolding of her betrayal. Witnesses shared how Janet had always appeared to be Jennifer's most loyal friend, but in hindsight, certain moments seemed to hint at something more sinister. Elijah spoke about Janet's increasing involvement in their lives, her insistence on being present, and how she'd sown seeds of discord, trying to isolate Jennifer from other friendships and even him. It became clear that Janet had meticulously plotted Jennifer's downfall, driven by an overwhelming jealousy that had transformed into a lethal desire to take over her life. As the prosecution presented its case, they painted a chilling portrait of Janet's motives and her methodical approach to manipulating Jennifer's family. They described how Janet's resentment had festered over the years, transforming from innocent envy into a consuming obsession. Evidence and witness testimonies showed how Janet had gradually undermined Jennifer's relationships, presenting herself as the perfect friend while secretly building a path toward her horrifying endgame. Forensic evidence, such as fibers, hair, and footprints, had tied Janet directly to the wooded scene where Jennifer and her children were found. It was as if every step Janet had taken in trying to conceal her involvement had instead left an indelible trace. Through her defense, Janet maintained a calm demeanor, but her mask of innocence had shattered for everyone else. Each piece of evidence brought forth exposed the calculating mind that had been hiding behind her friendly smiles and comforting words. In her desperation to escape punishment, Janet tried to claim innocence, attempting to cast herself as a wrongfully accused friend. But the mounting evidence and testimonies left no room for doubt, painting a picture of a deeply disturbed individual whose obsession had overridden every sense of morality. The trial was long and grueling, with the community closely following every update. People who had once shared coffee with Janet or waved at her from their yards were now grappling with the unthinkable reality of her betrayal. They were left haunted by the idea that the friend they had all trusted had been capable of such evil. The sentence, when it finally came, brought a sense of justice but little comfort to those who had lost so much. Janet was convicted on multiple counts, including premeditated murder and the deliberate concealment of the crime, and was sentenced to life without the possibility of parole. In the aftermath, the neighborhood struggled to heal. Friends and families who had once taken solace in the warmth of a tight-knit community were now left with a chilling reminder of the darkness that had lurked among them. Parents spoke in hushed tones about betrayal and trust, reluctant to let anyone come too close, fearful of hidden motives. A quiet wariness settled over the once friendly streets, and while Jennifer's life was remembered in fond stories and memorials, her tragic end lingered as a reminder of how deeply deception can cut. For Elijah, moving forward meant raising awareness of the dangers of hidden envy and emotional manipulation, especially in relationships built on trust. He became an advocate for those impacted by betrayal, sharing his story with others to help prevent similar tragedies. Though nothing could undo the horror of what had happened, he hoped that by sharing Jennifer's story, he could shed light on the unseen dangers that even the closest friendships can sometimes conceal. Jennifer's memory lived on, her story serving as a haunting cautionary tale about trust, betrayal, and the chilling lengths to which envy can drive a person.